Everyone on that jet thought she was just a tired single mom. But when the flight attendant struck her child and demanded she know her place, the woman stood up and revealed the truth that would end a career and rewrite every life on board. Ava Carter tightened her grip on Leo's tiny hand as they stepped through the private terminal's sliding glass doors, the cold morning wind tugging at her frayed sweatshirt, her heartbeat thumping like a drum she couldn't silence. The world around her gleamed with polished marble floors, designer luggage, and people dressed like magazine covers. And she wondered, not for the first time, if she still belonged anywhere. Her son, only 5, with his soft curls and sleepy eyes, clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit to his chest. They had endured the kind of morning others prayed they would never meet. Broken alarms, spilled cereal, a scraped knee, unpaid bills sitting on the counter like silent judgments. And yet here they stood, about to board a jet no ordinary person could imagine being near. For years, Ava had slipped through life invisible, dismissed, shelved in the category of single mom barely holding on. And she liked it that way. Because no one asked questions, no one expected things from her. And most importantly, no one knew that she was not merely a passenger today, but the secret owner of the entire aviation empire behind this flight. But that power, that colossal, earth-shifting truth, was a mask she rarely wore, a weapon she locked away like something too sharp to trust in her own hands. Because her late father had once said, "Money exposes people, Ava. It doesn't protect them." And she had learned painfully how true that was. She walked down the polished hallway toward Gate 7, where a security guard scanned boarding passes. His eyes flickered judgment when he saw her outfit. Jeans with a torn pocket, worn sneakers once white, now gray, and then slid to Leo, whose tear-stained cheeks gave away his exhaustion. "Ticket?" he asked, voice flat, tone the way people speak when they are confident they're higher on the social ladder. Ava reached into her backpack, hands shaking from both cold and nerves, and handed him the digital QR code. He scanned it, expecting a beep of rejection, but instead, the system flashed gold, executive priority owner. His eyebrows twitched, confusion, disbelief. But before he could question it, another group of passengers swept by, drowning the moment in noise. Ava stepped onto the red-carpeted boarding ramp, Leo's sneakers squeaking softly beside her. And when the jet came into view, a sleek silver Falcon 12X, engines humming like a sleeping lion. 1,000 memories flooded her mind. Memories of being 17, working 3 part-time jobs while her father's failing company crumbled under lawsuits. Memories of him telling her with weak eyes and an oxygen tube, "If it ever becomes yours, never let wealth decide who deserves dignity." Memories of her ex-husband, golden boy investment banker, who married her for access, drained her inheritance, cheated with her maid of honor, called her nothing when she confronted him, and only regretted leaving when he learned she had quietly rebuilt the company into a multinational empire, more powerful than ever. She pushed those memories down, lowering herself into the present moment, reminding herself that today wasn't about revenge or power. It was about taking her son to a specialist 3 states away who might finally diagnose the illness that kept him coughing at night, like his lungs were full of stones. The jet door opened with a hiss of pressure, warm air brushing their faces. Ava lingered on the threshold, inhaling the sterile lemon scent of cleaned leather seats, feeling her shoulders drop for the first time that morning. Maybe, just maybe, she could breathe now. But peace is fragile in a world built on masks. And before she could settle into that rare feeling, a voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Excuse me," came a sharp tone, crisp, annoyed, punctuated by heels striking the jet floor. And there she was, Melissa, the senior flight attendant, blonde hair in a tight bun, uniform pristine like she ironed it between blinks. "This jet is for private charter passengers only," she said, eyes narrowing as she scanned Ava and Leo, lingering on the stuffed rabbit like it was a disease. Ava opened her mouth to speak, fumbling with words, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "We're on this flight. But Melissa raised a hand, silencing her with the universal gesture reserved for those considered unimportant. "Unless you are here to clean, or brought on by another passenger as help, you don't belong here," she snapped, stepping closer. her perfume cloying and floral. Leo shrank behind Ava, little fingers curling into her sweatshirt. Ava swallowed, the old familiar lump rising in her throat, the one she learned to hide in years of rooms where people saw her as a shadow. My son and I, she tried again. Your son is loud, Melissa snapped, voice colder, eyes burning. And we don't tolerate noise or disruption in first-class aviation. She reached for Leo's backpack, yanking it off the seat beside Ava. Leo's body jolt was visible, his little mouth opening without sound at first. Then, a tiny whimper, the kind that comes before a storm of tears. And when Leo, trembling, reached out instinctively, desperate to hold on to the only familiar thing in a world of polished strangers, Melissa slapped his hand. The sound was small, a sharp pop, but it echoed through Ava's bones like a thunderclap. Gasps rose from scattered passengers already seated, pearls clutched, hands frozen mid-sip of champagne, eyes darting like spectators, unsure whether to intervene or pretend not to see. Leo's bottom lip quivered and he began to cry. Soft, broken sobs, the kind that shattered Ava's heart. Time slowed. Ava felt heat in her chest, rising like fire seeking air after being caged too long. Years of being small, silent, underestimated, humiliated, crashed into her at once. But even now, her instinct was to apologize, to shrink, to protect her boy by avoiding conflict. Please, don't touch my son, she whispered. Melissa scoffed, actually scoffed, and rolled her eyes so dramatically the motion seemed rehearsed. Then control him. This isn't a playground. And people like you, she sneered, voice lowering into a venomous whisper meant to sting, should know your place. People like you. Ava had heard those words from rich housewives dismissing her at charity galas, from her ex-husband's mother when she refused to sign a prenup, from corporate board members who voted against her, not knowing she was the majority shareholder. People like you, the sentence they used to shrink her. But something shifted inside Ava now. A tectonic crack, slow and powerful, a reminder that she was not the frightened girl scrubbing bathrooms at 17, nor the wife begging her husband to love her, nor the mother praying her son would be accepted in a world that ate softness alive. She stood slowly, breath stabilizing, spine straightening, and the silence around her grew thick, like the air itself sensed change. Melissa, oblivious, waved to a nearby crewman. Escort them out, she demanded. The man hesitated, kind of because truth has a way of whispering before it explodes, and Ava finally raised her chin. Her voice when it came was no longer a whisper, it was steel. I won't be going anywhere, she said, calm, anchored, holding Leo close. Because this plane, every seat, every engine, every flight staff contract and maintenance agreement belongs to me. The words struck like lightning. Heads turned. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand, shattering softly. The pilot, who had just stepped out of the cockpit, froze mid-step, recognition dawning in his widening eyes. Ms. Carter? He breathed. And that, the name, was the moment reality began to rearrange itself. Ava Carter was not a nobody. She was the quiet architect of a billion-dollar empire, the hidden name on the global registry of Carter Global Aviation International, the owner of the jet, the owner of the airline, the owner of the very uniform Melissa was wearing. And though she had never wanted to speak her power aloud, today she would not shrink. Not for anyone. Not ever again. Silence wrapped the cabin like a tightening rope as the realization of who stood before them rippled through the air, the atmosphere shifting from superiority to disbelief to fear. Each passenger suddenly aware that their whispers, their glances, their judgment had been directed at the woman who silently held ownership over the ground beneath their polished shoes. Ava hadn't spoken yet. She simply stood there holding Leo, her heart pounding but her face calm. The kind of calm found only in people who have survived storms and learned how to keep their flame burning despite the wind. The pilot was the first to move, tall, composed Captain Rivers, who stepped toward her with a slight bow, his voice softer than the hum of the engines. Miss Carter, I offer my deepest apologies. We were informed you would arrive later. Ava registered the respect in his eyes. Not the fearful kind of respect born from titles and wealth, but the sincere type given to someone who has earned admiration beyond what the world can see. She nodded once, not out of pride, but out of acknowledgement that dignity still existed in some corners of humanity. Melissa, meanwhile, stood frozen, the color draining from her face, her lips parting in shock as the truth hit her like a collapsing wall. The woman she insulted, humiliated, and struck through her child was her employer's employer. A stutter escaped her mouth. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice nothing like the icy blade it had been minutes ago. Ava could have let her suffer in silence, could have savored the karmic moment, could have unleashed the fury she had swallowed for decades. But Leo, still holding his mother's hand, looked up at her with wide, watery eyes, and it was his quiet presence that guided her response. That is exactly the problem, Ava said, her words slow and clear, not meant for revenge, but for truth. You didn't know who I was, and because of that, you believed we were worth less. A hush swept over the passengers, who now shifted uncomfortably, realizing their own guilt. For they too had judged, even if silently. Melissa's chin trembled. Please, I have been doing this for 20 years. This job is my life. Ava breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of her father's lessons, the weight of every time she was told she didn't belong. She looked Melissa in the eyes, seeing not a villain, but a product of a world where status determined compassion. Then perhaps, Ava said quietly, you should spend time discovering a life where dignity does not depend on uniforms or income. She gave one slow nod to the pilot, a signal that required no explanation. Melissa was escorted off the plane, not with force but with silence. And that silence, more than anything, was the punishment she would remember forever. Once she was gone, Ava sat with Leo in seat 14B, the same seat where pain had begun, except now she sat differently. Her shoulders no longer curled inward. They rested, grounded, certain. Leo laid his head against her arm, still sniffling. Mommy, did she leave because she was mean to me? He whispered, innocence heavy in his voice. Ava kissed his forehead. She left because she forgot something important, Ava murmured, that every person deserves kindness, even when the world tells them they don't matter. Leo nodded as if he understood everything, because children have a way of sensing truth long before adults do. The jet ascended into the sky, clouds parting beneath them like silk curtains, and for the first time in years, Ava felt her breath flow freely, as though she hadn't been breathing fully since her father died, since her marriage ended, since the world taught her to dim herself. During the flight, something unexpected happened. A woman across the aisle, who had earlier looked away when Leo cried, now stood and approached Ava, tears pooling in her eyes. Miss Carter, she whispered, I want you to know. I watched, and I said nothing. I'm sorry. Ava looked up, surprised, not by the words, but by the vulnerability it took to speak them. She offered a gentle smile. We all stay silent sometimes, she said. What matters is what we choose moving forward. The woman squeezed her hand before returning to her seat, and Ava felt the world shift one more inch towards something softer. Hours later, when the jet landed, Ava and Leo were driven to the Children's Specialty Clinic downtown, a building of soft pastels and glass walls, letting in sunlight like hope personified. Doctors greeted them by name, because Ava, long before she admitted her own worth, had donated millions anonymously to medical research in hopes that one day a child like Leo would find answers. As doctors examined Leo, Ava waited alone in the hallway, staring at a vending machine reflection of herself. Worn sweatshirt, tired eyes, hair loosely tied. And she smiled because she finally understood something profound. She could buy 10 wardrobes of diamonds, but she would still be this woman, and this woman, strong, gentle, scarred, loving, was enough. When the doctor returned, he kneeled to meet Leo's eye level and said, Your cough is caused by a chronic allergy. Manageable. Treatable. You're going to be okay. Ava's body sagged in relief, tears blooming without warning. Because sometimes victory doesn't arrive in golden trophies. Sometimes it arrives in a whisper that your child will live, that tomorrow will exist. As the sun slowly set into lavender skies, Ava and Leo returned to the plane for their homeward flight. But this time, something extraordinary happened. The entire crew, new attendants, chosen by Captain Rivers, stood in a line at the door, and instead of bows or fearful apologies, they offered warm smiles, the kind people give when hearts recognize hearts. As Ava stepped aboard, a small plaque caught her eye near the cockpit door. It hadn't been there earlier. Engraved in brushed gold, it read, "In honor of Ava Carter, who reminds us that worth is measured in humanity, not wealth." Ava's breath caught. She wasn't someone who cried easily. She had cried too much in her life already. But in that moment, tears welled with a softness she hadn't felt in years. She hugged Leo close, whispering into his hair, "No matter how high we fly, we will always stay grounded." And Leo, with the wisdom only children possess, whispered back, "Because hearts don't need airplanes to soar." The jet lifted into the sky once more, cutting through clouds like destiny made visible. And as Ava gazed down at the shrinking world beneath her, she finally allowed herself to feel something she had denied for far too long: peace. She no longer needed to hide. She no longer needed to prove. In a world obsessed with labels, she chose to simply be a mother, a survivor, a woman who built her own wings. And as the stars emerged one by one in the quiet sky, it was clear the story was never about a slap, or a uniform, or even wealth. It was about a woman who learned that power without compassion is hollow, and that the greatest legacy we leave behind is not what we own, but who we choose to be.